Hey everybody. So this week we've got a combo cube. It's going to be dirt and grass. So I think it's just kind of a fun way of showing both these materials. And if you'd like to do the same for your homework, if you haven't done these cubes already, feel free to do so. That'll make you have 5 cubes instead of 6. It's not really that much less work because both of these materials need to be shown in the best of your ability, I should say. And another thing too, if you haven't done the animal poop cube, poop cube, just find another material that you can substitute for that if you'd like. I'd suggest something like wet clay or something along those lines, because to be quite frank, I don't feel like looking at 20 references and paintings of poop, and I'm sure that actually making the paintings is not that fun either. I feel like it's a bit of like a sadistic assignment. I didn't make that. So yeah, save yourself some of the nausea and pick something else. If I'll leave it to your discretion what that would be, but if you have questions, I'll always just send me a message in the instructor's office and we can work it out. But I think just as long as it's some kind of organic, like dirt-like material that doesn't look like the other materials you have, should be fine. And yeah, so I've got this demo that I painted. I actually painted this when I was working on site, I believe. Maybe it's all these blend together, but it's about 12 minutes. It's sped up a lot in parts. It was about a 40-minute painting. So I can slow it down in certain areas to sort of emphasize things. And then also, this one's helpful too, because I go over how I make a brush to do the grass. So make sure you pay attention to this one. It's a good one. All right. Thanks a lot, and let's get going. Alright, so from the start, I'm making my cube darker. All stuff you've seen before. And I'm doing a color layer on top with a clipping mask to get that local color of the dirt. Now, it's important to note that this is going to get darker than it is right now, but I want to start sort of in the middle so I can put darks and lights into it. It can be kind of difficult if you're starting from like a really dark cube. And this brush I'm using right now is this Rock Big brush. So one thing about a pattern brush such as this is, you're going to see me put it down, but I'm not going to just leave it. I think one of the big things I've been seeing from people's work is that they're using a pattern brush or a texture brush, and then they just kind of leave it. So it makes your stuff look really two-dimensional if you don't come in and paint form on top of it. And now I'm using a small rock brush on top of that. Play around and see what looks right. And the other thing too is I'm switching up these pattern brushes that I'm using, going along the different edges, trying to get sort of the variation that you're seeing in here. So it's like not just the same size clumps of dirt. There's all sorts of, there's big, medium, small. There's there's like little rocks as well. So that's what I'm trying to do with my sorry, brain fart. With with the pattern brushes that I'm using. So that's on an overlay layer, and then I'm using a normal layer on top. I kind of shift between using overlay and normal layers on this one, but overlay for the initial pattern brush. Now I'm using the main sketch chalk brush to come in and paint, just like I was saying, paint that form into the patterns that this texture brush has created. So yeah, it's really important. That's one of the things I see most often with sort of amateur digital paintings, is that you'll use a texture brush or something and you just leave it, and that's really not the way to go. You always want to take control and add light and shadow, modify it so that it makes it feel three-dimensional. All right, and so here I'm cutting, making a sort of the grass top. And I'm going into... Originally I was trying to go underneath it with a different layer, but to get the light, dark, and shadow, or light, mid, and shadow, but that wouldn't work with all the texture stuff on there, so I had to come back in on top. But you notice that when I put this green sort of cap on it, here, let me back up for a second. When I put this green cap on it, I still put the light, mid, and shadow on it, just like how the rest of the cubes has it. Right now, it's that delineation isn't as clear on the dirt part, but I'll come back in and make sure that, you know, there's more light on this side, and this is the definite shadow side. What I'm doing next is I'm showing, there's like a grass brush in my brush set. I'm kind of showing why it's not ideal, but I'm using it sort of as like a base to add on to later, and then I'm going to make an actual new grass brush to use with it. So this is sort of just to get like a base of texture in there. And what's really important to note about grass, and what a lot of people get wrong about it with this assignment, is that they treat it like it's all one thing, and like they treat it like it's like one solid object. But in reality, what grass is it's built up of multiple blades of grass. So that's what makes it kind of difficult to paint, is that you've got so many individual blades, and each of those blades is going to have highlight, midtone, and shadow, right? So we have to find a way to sort of make that faster, more expedient. So what I'm going to do is I'm making I'm making the blades of grass with a lasso brush, lasso tool right now. And so what I did is I took that layer, that was on a separate layer with the lasso brush, lasso tool, excuse me, and I took it and I filled it with black. So I could have done that from the start, just filled it with black, but it helped to sort of do it on top of here to kind of get a sense of the scale and if it looked right or not. So this is where I'm going to make the custom brush. And I'm trying to get it so that, you know, it sort of feathers into itself. And so by doing that, what I'm doing right there is I'm using like a 50%. Like I just made another layer underneath using the lasso tool again, but filling it with like a gray and making the opacity of that layer a lot less, so that you know, when I use this brush, it'll sort of fade into itself. If I did all hard opacity, I mean, it could still work, but this way you'll get a little bit of you know, subtlety there. And I just turned off the background visibility, click the eye right here, so that it's really clear. And what I'm doing with the selection is I'm going to hit Control-Shift-C, and that what that does is it copies everything as if it was a flat file. There's like it disregards the layers and just copies everything flat. And so by doing that, and then you have to paste it also onto a new layer. But so I define a pattern from that. So here, sped up a little too fast to show that this is an important step. So okay. So here's where I'm trying to figure out how to make a brush. It's getting a little glitchy. So define pattern. Cancel, not define pattern. Define brush preset. So that's what I'm doing here. So I made the Cody grass. And what I'm doing in here is I'm sort of playing with the different dynamics of the brush. So it's got the size jitter. What that means is it will change size as I'm using it. So what that means without any sort of control on it, it just basically means it's going to be random sizes as it goes. Color dynamics, I'm putting foreground background jitter. So that means that they're not all going to be the same color depending on what I paint. This grass will have various colors. It'll flip between whatever my foreground and background color is. And I'm just playing with the different ones there. I really suggest just trying some stuff out. Take an extra 20 minutes or so and just play around with those settings and see what works for you. And so from here too, I'm doing the opacity jitter under transfer and using my pen pressure for that. So, and I've got the angle jitter set to initial direction. I might change that to pen tilt. That'll make, depending on how I hold my hand, that'll make the brush tilt. And I turned off the transfer. So you can see me playing around with this too. It's a little bit of trial and error every time. And so what I'm doing here is I'm going to actually paint onto my my template cube layer, or above it. Am I painting above it? Yeah, I think I'm going to paint above it. And then I'm actually painting into the layer because I want my contour, you know, that grass, I don't want it to be a perfect cube. I want it to be a contour. I want it to feel like it's sticking up off the cube. So by going into the original thing that everything has clipping masks on, that's what I'm doing. So from here, I'm painting the various layers of the grass. So it's really important to note that, like, in between each of these clumps of grass, there's going to be shadow, right? If the light's coming from this direction, that means one side of it's going to be getting hit by light and one side's going to be in shadow. And then another clump will have its own sort of relationship with that light source because it's got another clump of grass in front of it. It's kind of tricky at first, but if you think of it in terms of like a grid of shapes with light hitting it rather than just one solid mass, it'll hopefully help. And it'll make it a lot faster to paint too. And so from here, what I'm going to be doing is I don't want that solid line of the grass going into the dirt. So in my grass layer, I put on a mask and I'm just eating into that contour using a different brush, playing around with different stuff. And like I said, you know, whenever you use a pattern brush, even if it's one you make, you want to come back in with a regular brush and paint into it. So I'm using the bristle brush to kind of paint those spots in between the grass, and then also some of the individual blades of grass that are getting hit by light. And using an overlay layer to achieve that, I believe. And I think it's important to note too, with this sort of painting, you don't have to make all of the blades of grass like amazing, you know, unless you really want to. But I'm trying to make the ones that are closest to us have a feeling of more detail. And then the ones that are a little bit farther away, I'm not having as much detail. And so now I'm, you know, just kind of give the idea, that the feeling of complexity without showing the complexity. And so from here, I'm using an overlay layer on top of everything and just reinforce the shadow like I said I would. And then I'm also reinforcing the light, making it so the light is hitting. I guess in this one, the light source is kind of coming from the front a little bit more this way. But so I'm hitting it with a warm color, a warm bright, and on an overlay layer. And then I'm erasing out of it where there's going to be those shadows on the top there. And so now I'm coming in and sort of integrating the grass into this. If you notice on the reference that it's a little bit less saturated as it's going in, so I'm going to reduce the saturation of the bottom of these blades of grass. And yeah, now I'm coming in and painting individual lumps of this dirt, making sure they're shapes that have light, mid-tone, and shadow. They're basically little spheres. And I forget which brush this is. It might be like one of the oil round brushes, maybe the dry oil. So on the opposite side, same thing as last week. Where I'm making the shadow less you know, there's stuff in there, but I'm not making it contrasty, and I'm not focusing on making it as detailed as what's happening in the light. You know, as an illustrator or as a painter or a commercial artist, you really have to budget your time. And so any place that you can sort of reduce the man hours that you're spending is good. And also it just works that way in a painting too. But in the shadow, it doesn't need to be as detailed as the light. Save all your sort of texturing efforts for what's happening where the light is hitting it. And, you know, sort of get used to sort of suggesting what's happening in the shadow and lowering the contrast too. Doesn't mean make it super dark, and it might be appearing super dark on this video. There's something about how recording from the screen and the compression, it gets a little bit darker. So I'll add the PSD. But yeah, like choose your battles basically. Make the stuff that's in the light more tight, and it actually makes it a more believable painting when you have areas that are sort of tighter than others. Yeah, and you can see me going through figuring out different ways of making it look like that's integrated in there. So what I'm doing here is I'm making some reflected light on the other side. So I put a sort of light desaturated fade on there, and I'm erasing out of it using the contours that have already been set up here. And breaking up the edge, breaking up that. Because, you know, with reflected light, you want it to be there, but you don't want it to be like a whole big thing. And so I'm going to do kind of the same thing on the light, except using a brighter light and a warmer light. Then I'm erasing out of it with this rock brush. And like always, coming back in and hitting it. And brush. And yeah, this is an important thing too. Like, you want to come in and make sure that the edges are nice and clean. They're a little sketchy right now, so I want to make sure that those edge pieces are unique and clean, because people look at the edges too. And adding little pieces of dirt on the outside of it. It's not going to be super clean, right? And doing my shadow trick. Copying everything. Making a layer underneath. Putting a feather on that selection. Filling it with black. Scooting it down a couple pixels. And then you can see where I'm erasing from it. Right about here. I want it to feel like this is just being cast by the object, and if you do it right, it feels more three-dimensional. If you do it wrong, it feels more two-dimensional because it feels like a sticker or something, because it's got a shadow where it shouldn't. Making a Smarty Pants object. Running the unsharp mask a little bit tighter. And yeah, so there you go. Got grass and dirt. Let me know if you have questions. And yeah, what code word should we use? Well, there was an old movie in the 90s that was really crazy called The Lawnmower Man. So I suggest you look that up and then use that as the code word. All right. Thanks so much. Take care of yourselves. Bye.